So I'm here in my back garden, and I do have an awful lot of bramble in my garden, but usually I try to train it against the fence, and it actually makes a really good hedge once it gets really thick. If you can get it under control, brilliant. It's got lovely blossoms, the bees love it, and you get blackberries obviously in the summer. You can also get cultivated forms that don't have spines, which are a bit easier. So if you do have bramble, don't get rid of all of it. See if you can train it and use it, because it's actually great. It's evergreen. Birds love to nest in it as well. So it's quite handy if you can get it under control. So I'm just going over to my pond, which is a bit of an unusual pond. It's a bath that my neighbours gave to me when they took it out of their bathroom. It's going to go in the ground at some point. It's full of iris that needs a bit of clearing out, but hopefully you can see some tadpoles. There's a tadpole. The frogs seem to hop in there quite happily, and when the baby frogs develop, they just hop back out. So they don't seem to mind it being off the ground. And this is the bottom of my garden. We've got some really big trees, so it's shady. So I thought, let's go for shade. Planted an oak tree here. There's plenty of woodland flowers here. We've got some hedge garlic, or jack by the hedge. It's a bit blurry, this video. Green alkanet, that's a herb. I've got some geraniums. So there's a bit of garden stuff in there. Hellebores, primroses. Oh, I've got some sweet woodruff. Primroses have gone over. I've got some bluebells. I've just bought bulbs, collected some seeds, from roadsides, that sort of thing. Got some wild garlic in there as well, which seems to be doing okay. That's a hazel, kind of coppice. And finally, we've got some compost heaps, which aren't very glamorous, but all kind of homemade. Obviously, if you've got space, even if you've got a small one, you're reusing your waste, and you've got homes for all sorts of little bugs in there. I have found a smooth newt in my compost heap. That's about the most exciting thing I've found. So I would love to see other reptiles and things like that, but living sort of in a suburban area, they probably can't get there. But I do have hedgehog that I've seen this year. So it's all that sort of undergrowth and logs and stuff that they like, but you need to make sure they can get in the garden. I raised my gate off the ground, and that's when the hedgehogs managed to get in, because the rest of it's all sealed up. But I need to put some little holes in the fence, I think. But yeah, they seem to be able to get in okay.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Oh, what a lovely garden. Thanks, Kate, for the tour. Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of training brambles and this sort of guerrilla gardening onto the pavement there. and the idea of green roofs as well. I haven't done anything like that in my garden, so that's great. I love that. So we have got time. We're going to do get onto the question and answers part of the session now. We've got a couple that have come through on social media earlier in the week, so I'll ask some of those first to get us started. But Ben, if people have got questions, can they start putting some?
Absolutely. That's where you're answering the questions that have been sent in. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll find a place that says Q&A. So just type your question in there, and we'll try and bring as many of you in to ask your question directly to Kate or Katie, and then see whether we know the answer. I think I should probably say that. So yeah, so just it says Q&A. And 2 people have already found it, so please do pop your question in there. I see that one person's left their question anonymously. If you could not do that, just because it makes it hard for us to find you to bring you in to ask your question. So whoever that was, retype it saying who you were, so that we can actually get you to ask your question on the call. Okay, so over back to you, Katie and Kate.
Okay, so the first question, Kate, has come from Ivy Bound Moon from Instagram. And she, or he, I should say, has said, I live in a flat with a small balcony. Any suggestions for bringing wildlife to my small space?
Ah, okay, that's a good one, because I think that could apply to lots of spaces, couldn't it? I'd say, first of all, bird feeders and water for birds, and they will come up to that sort of height if they know what's there. You might even be able to get a bird box on the wall as well, but I think you probably need some shelter as well, so maybe climbers and things like that, if you can get containers on the balcony. It's all that sort of vertical space that you can use as well. But I'd say probably you don't have a lot of space, you can't have big containers, then it's things like herbs are really good because they are kind of drought tolerant, like rosemary, chives, all that kind of thing. So they're useful for you, but also they're really good for flowering, for bees and butterflies and things like that. You might even be able to, you know, put a very small water feature in there, like a container pond. Some things will fly in, like water boatmen and things like that. So yeah, it's all the drought tolerant things really. Things like the sedums, you can kind of cover any sort of surface with that because they only need a little bit of soil. What were my other ideas? Yeah, sort of edible things, maybe peas, sweet peas, that sort of climbers, maybe annuals and things like that. Yeah, and bug houses, I think. Those masonry bees, that's what I was going to say as well. They're really good. They don't mind coming up to a building because they will live in walls. So you can get masonry bee houses and they lay their eggs in there and they hatch out, and they're really harmless things. They just go around pollinating. So they're quite nice.
That's great. Thanks, Kay. That was a very thorough answer. That's fab.
Love to see some pictures if you do
Yeah.
any things as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea actually. Yeah. Okay, so that was question number 1. Now we've got another question. This is from Sandy in Neston, and she's asked, I've got a small garden with limited borders and mostly pot plants. What can I do to attract butterflies?
Butterflies. I think that would be, yeah, basically lots of flowers all through the year. Bulbs are really good early on, things like crocus, snowdrops, tulips, anything like that. They're quite good in containers because they don't mind getting a bit dry. Obviously all the herbs, and yeah, climbers if you can, things like jasmine, honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is more popular with moths because they need long tongues to get in there, but it's also food plants as well. So certain things, I know holly blue obviously lives on holly. There's various plants you can plant for, I think it's orange tip grows, lives on the hedge garlic and some other sort of plants like that. So yeah, it's basically nectar really, isn't it? Making sure you have that all through the year. We can actually send you some plant lists if you like, that give you the whole sort of season right from the beginning to the end, and that's the kind of thing you need.
Is there anywhere, I think there might be somewhere online we can point people to for that, can't we? There is a quite a good web page on the Wildlife Trust website that's got some ideas for things to plant for butterflies.
I think you can also have butterfly feeders where you put kind of a sugar mix in there. I don't know much about those, so that will help if you don't have much space as well.
Yeah, and butterfly habitats as well. They tend to come as one set piece. It's a habitat with a fold out bit with a sort of table where you can put the butterfly food.
Okay.
Or the, yeah, so that's quite and they look nice as well, things like that. But even better with butterflies feeding on them. So that's our first 2 questions. We have had a couple more, but it might be nice. I can see some names appearing on the screen here, Ben. So there's obviously some people with questions for us.
Lots of people with questions, so let's see how we go. So we're going to start bringing people in. So just a note to those people that I am bringing in, this is being recorded and we will post it on our website. No one will see you, but they would hear you. So if you're uncomfortable with that, just sort of, mute yourself and don't ask your question. But I think you should be all right. But I just thought I need to get that in there before we bring you on air, as it were. With that caveat, we're going to go to Peter, who has a question about rabbits. So over to you, Peter. And we'll just wait, give him a minute. There's always a few moments when the person realises they're on. So, hi, Peter, can you hear us? Okay, so I think Peter might have a microphone issue. Peter, I'm going to mute you again, but we'll come back to you in a minute. So if you can see what's going on with your machine, if you work it out, then let us know and I'll come back to you in about 2 or 3 minutes. So we'll actually go over to, I think it's Kay Jones, for our next question.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hello, I just had a question about starting a compost heap in a garden where there's not much space, and I would most likely need to use a bin. I don't think I could go for the system that Kate showed in her garden of having heaps. And I just wondered if there's any tips for getting a compost bin started.
I think basically you need the right mixture of ingredients. So if you just have lawn clippings, they go really mushy. So you have to mix in some dry stuff as well. So about 50-50, I would say, or shredded paper is good as well, cardboard. It's just having a good mixture. Keeping it damp as well. If it gets dry, you can water it with a watering can. I really ought to have carpet or something on top of mine because they do dry out. So it's keeping them nice and moist, and you can put some kitchen scraps and things like that in there, as long as it doesn't attract rats or anything. Yeah, just get a good mixture really. Make sure you can aerate it a bit, that keeps it going, but it's just having enough stuff in there to get it started. But mine are cold compost heaps. I don't turn them or anything, I just kind of leave them. So it takes a while, but yeah, just sort of layer up the green and the dry ingredients and keep it damp with watering can.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate.
Ben, we can't hear you.
Oh, well, there we go. The internet is beset with technical difficulties, apparently. So let's go back to Peter. And I understand, I've had it in good authority, that Peter is not, in fact, Peter. It's Beatrice using Peter's account. So, Beatrice, can you hear us? And are you able to talk? Okay, so it sounds like that issue's not been resolved. So her question, Beatrice's question is she would like to combine her garden with wild rabbits, but they dig up young plants and the lawn. Have you got any advice on whether there's, I suppose, an arrangement that would make that possible?
Oh, we have that issue at Wellesley. At our headquarters, we have a lot of rabbits there. And whenever we've set up the wildlife garden, they've come in and eaten things. So I think what we did was the volunteers put a little fence around some parts that they didn't want the rabbits to get into. It was like a woven hurdle fence. Obviously when they're bigger they can jump over that, but there was enough space. I think they didn't bother the plants too much. I would just cover up anything with a cage or a sort of a cloche or something like that until it gets established. In terms of digging up the lawn, that's difficult because I know they do dig up, don't they, and they kind of do little holes. I suppose if you've got a wild area and you let the grass grow a bit longer, then it will all kind of look natural. It's hard to stop them going where you don't want them to. They especially like the short areas because it's nice and fresh for them to eat. I guess you might want to have a neat area that you keep looking more manicured, and then the wilder areas it won't matter so much if they dig up, because a little bit of bare ground is actually good for all the invertebrates and things like that. Out in the wild you'd have very hummocky areas and it would be a lot more kind of varied than just a lawn. So yeah, I would just try and fence them out of areas in a kind of attractive way if you can, and get some things to protect your young plants and seedlings. Once they get big enough, they're usually a bit more rabbit proof, unless you've got hundreds of them, and then they'll eat little shrubs and things. It's guarding things until they get big enough, I think. So I hope that works.
Thank you, and thanks for your question, Beatrice. I'm sorry that we couldn't bring you on. So we're going to go across to Jason now, who's got a question about starlings. I should say, in everybody's case, it may well be that we don't have your name, that you just got your username that you've got for your account. So do introduce yourself when I bring you in. So possibly, Jason, let's hear your question. Oh, so I think
Jason's muted.
Yeah, I know. So Jason, you're probably trying to unmute at the same time as I am. So don't press anything for a second, and let me see if I can bring you in. Okay. What we'll do is we'll come back to you, Jason, in a minute and see if we can get that to work. We're going to go instead to Lucy, who's got a question about wildflower seed.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Lucy.
Hello, Lucy. I was just wondering if you can recommend anywhere that you can actually buy any wildflowers from, like, you know, wild garlic or bluebells or something like that.
Okay, I've bought mine from a company called Naturescape, and they're based in the Midlands, and they get all their seeds from the Midlands sort of area, so they're sort of more locally native. I've also bought from Emma's Gate, and they're down in Somerset, but they have a kind of a bigger range of plants. I also do, you know, I swap seeds from other people's gardens, and legally speaking, if you get the landowner's permission, you can collect wild seed from a woodland or anything, but you just have to have permission, basically. But yeah, Naturescape's a good one. It's got loads of, they do plug plants and they do seeds as well. I think someone actually asked on the chat as well whether you can get stitchwort from seed. You can, it's just really difficult. I usually just propagate it from little cuttings because it just roots. So anything that creeps, especially the woodland plants, you can get a bit and it will root and you can plant that and it'll spread, generally speaking.
That's really helpful, thank you.
Good luck.
Cheers.
Sorry, it'd be remiss of me not to mention, as I'm from Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and we do have an online shop, and you can buy some wild seed there as well. It's probably not as good a range as the stuff that Kate's looking out for, but if you wanted to support a wildlife trust, you can always do that as well.
We could share those
there,
links, couldn't we?
Yes, a good plug, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. So what we'll do is we'll try and go back to Jason and see if we can bring them on now. So let's just see. It's very strange that that's not working.
Could Jason try and unmute himself?
I think what we'll do is we'll ask Jason's question for him. So I've got it here. So Jason says, we have lots of young starlings visiting our bird feeders who overshadow the smaller birds. Is this going to cause the other birds a problem?
It can do if they're just not getting any food. I don't know what to suggest about that other than more bird feeders. But then you might just get more and more starlings. I don't know whether they feed on the feeder all day, because they do tend to sort of take it in turns, birds. If they're being frightened off by one, they'll wait their turn to come in. It may just be that you need feeders in different places. I'm wondering if starlings don't like any particular environments. They don't tend to go into woodlands that much, so maybe sort of a more sheltered area under some trees or something. The other birds would like that better and the starlings wouldn't go in there. I think you might just have to experiment, but I'll look that up and see if we've got any other answers for that.
It might be a case of offering different, and like you say, having different feeders in different areas of the garden depending on how big the space is, and if those feeders have got a different type of food in each feeder that attract, because different birds like different types of food as well. So if you've got the option of offering a variety, then all the better.
That's brilliant, really interesting question. Thanks very much. So we're going to go across now to somebody whose username is user. So we don't know your name. So please do introduce yourself as you come in with your question. I have a lot of people who it looks like it's going to work. Great. Hello.
It's not me, is it, Sue?
Oh, hi, Sue.
I put Sue from Lichfield. It was the question about the garden pond.
Okay, Sue, you're coming in a moment, if that's all right, Sue. I'll bring you in a second. Thanks. So the person with the username user, I think it sounds like they haven't got a microphone. So what we'll go, I'll ask their question as well. So the question from user was, I have suet balls in my bird feeders, but no birds seem to like them. They have gone black, bought new ones, and again, they have not been eaten. What do you think?
It might be because it's now springtime. I'm presuming it's now that you've got them. There's so much other food out there, and they're looking at getting more protein for their chicks. So they're looking at getting, you know, caterpillars and things. It's usually over the winter they need more of the fat to keep them warm over winter. So maybe it's just not the right thing for them this time of year, and they're out looking for protein. So things like mealworms, and I think more sort of nuts and things like that are better for them because they're feeding young at the moment. So they're probably just not that interested in fat.
I agree, and I think that given the hot weather that we've been having, it's highly likely that those fat balls are going off quicker, because you are meant to replace them quite regularly anyway. But it's probably been a little bit too warm for fat balls.
All right, thank you.
Great question, thank you.
Oh, then.
I didn't realise I had to put my name in.
Don't worry about it.
Oh,
We can hear you now. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got loads of suet balls. I've never used. They keep going off.
Yeah.
It's the weather. They're winter food, really, I think.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
Are we going to go to Sue next?
No, sorry, I'm supposed to be. It's Joe is next. Is our next question. So I'm trying to be very fair and do them in the order in which they've come in. So Sue is definitely going to get to ask her question. Don't worry. She's definitely got a working microphone. We know that, Sue. So we'll talk to you in a second. But Joe, let's hear from you. And here's a question, really interesting question about water voles.
Ooh.
So,
Joe's still muted.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to unmute him. So just a word to everybody, what will happen when I bring you in, when I say that we're about to bring you in, you don't need to press anything. So don't press any buttons when I bring you in. I will just press a button that will allow you to speak. But it does look like we can't unmute Joe. So Joe, if you don't press anything, and we can't bring Joe in. So I'll ask Joe's question for them. And so Joe says, I have a brook in my garden in stone. Is it likely that I could get water voles in the brook? Are there any water voles in Staffordshire, particularly locally?
Wow, that's lucky to have a brook in your garden. There are still water voles in Staffordshire. There's not very many colonies left though now. There used to be some in stone in the business park, but we saw signs of years ago. It's probably about 10 years ago. It might be possible, but there would need to be colonies nearby, and we don't know of any others in stone that exist now. So not likely, unfortunately, unless they were potentially reintroduced somewhere around there. But you need to have lots of really good habitat and no mink, no cats, because they've died out from so many areas for various reasons, being predated, losing habitat. So we don't do the introductions generally in Staffordshire for those sort of animals, because if they've died out from an area, that you have to fix all the problems for them to be able to survive there in the future. So the best way is, for them to come back naturally from their strongholds. Not aware of any in stone, unfortunately. I have other things like crayfish in your brook. There's some really beautiful streams around in stone. I don't know which brook it is, whether it's the Scotch brook. That's a brilliant stream in stone that's very natural. When it gets to stone, it's not so natural, but upstream it is. I don't think water voles are going to appear anytime soon, but if we find any near stone, we'll let you know.
Great, thank you very much. What an interesting question. And so we're going to go across to Francis, who has a question about green roofs.
Hello. Yes, we've got a small shed. It's not very big. The roof is sloping. It's sort of slopes two ways. One way faces south. And hearing mention of a green roof earlier on, I thought, well, that'd be a good idea, because I think we do quite a lot towards encouraging wildlife, but we don't do that. So how would I go about establishing it?
Oh, great. Well, there's various booklets and instructions available online. We can send you some instructions, but essentially you need a kind of a membrane over the top. What you can do is have a frame that you can fix on top of the roof, so that you're not piercing anything on your existing roof. and then you can fill that with soil and drought tolerant plants, bulbs and things like that. You only probably need about 10 centimetres of soil. It's just depending on your roof and the structure, you can build something that just fits on the top, a bit like a kind of box. Yeah, I mean, I've got it straight, the soil straight on top of my porch and my bay window because it's just lead, so nothing's going to go through that. But most shed roofs, you know, you've got the felt, so you need something on top of that to stop the roots kind of getting into the felt. But yeah, it can be a little bit technical depending on the kind of building you've got, but we could send you some booklets. There's some really good resources out there with examples, so you can just find something to fit to your roof and fill it in, as long as it's sturdy enough to take the weight. If you're worried about the weight, you can put more soil towards the edges where the walls are and leave it a bit thinner in the middle. Yeah, there's various things you can buy as well. You can buy wildflower turf and various mats to go on and various kind of fancy products that you can fit, or you can kind of do it yourself.
What sort of plants would you put on?
So I tend to use sedums. Also things like chives are actually really good because they're a bulb, so they retain water and they, you know, flower in the spring when it's damper. You can put crocus and things like that, the little bulbs. Anything kind of drought tolerant, so the sort of creeping stuff you get in rock gardens, basically.
Right.
Anything like that. I also always, when I'm out and about, you know, I look at these sort of stony areas, gravelly, waste ground, all those kind of places, and see what grows there, and try and get similar things. I mean, I have got quite a lot of gravel areas in the garden. Things just kind of grow in them. You know, seeds blow in, and if it's nice, it's pretty, and it's surviving, I kind of pull it up and stick it somewhere else. So it's a bit experimental, really.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frances.
Thank you, Frances.
So we're going to go across to Sue now from Lichfield. So let's bring you in.
Hi.
Hi, Sue.
Are you hearing me? Good.
Yes.
We have a garden pond. We've had.
Oh.
Sue!
That's me. I'm sorry. Hang on. That was my fault. I was removed.
Sue!
We've got something against her now. Poor Sue.
Can you hear
back.
me? Oh,
Yes.
She's back.
Right, my garden pond, successful wildlife garden pond for a good few years. Frogs every spring, frog spawn, and it's had a leak, so we replaced the lining, put some new water in last year, and the water has gone green. We've had no frog spawn this year, but we do have newts. Now, I have heard that newts will eat frog spawn, but we haven't even had any frog spawn. Is the green water a problem to wildlife is really what I want to know.
It can be if it smothers everything. It's probably just because you've got new water in there, and tap water, you know, has got quite a lot of nutrients in. It's got nitrates in generally, and it takes a while for the nutrients to settle to the bottom or for everything to kind of eat it and it balance out. So you can just fish out all the green stuff, but you know, there'll be lots of wildlife in there. I think you can have some treatments, can't you, that you can put a bale of, is it barley straw, I think, can kind of kill out. Yeah. It's not a huge problem. I mean, I've got quite a lot of algae in my pond and everything just eats it, but I wonder whether the pH or something is different now, and now the frogs don't particularly like it in there anymore. We do tend to find when we do amphibian surveys that you don't get all amphibians in one pond. You get newt ponds and you get frog ponds and you get toad ponds. They don't all mix together, so there must be something that either puts them off. Maybe it's so full of newts and the frogs can tell, and they think, well, we're not going to bother laying eggs in here. I'm not an amphibian expert, so I'm not sure why that might be, but it's just the balance, I think. But you might be able to get a testing kit. I think you can get water testing kits to test, you know, the nutrient levels and see what's up with the water. That might be an idea.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. We're going to go across to Rebecca, who has a question about tadpoles.
Hi, Rebecca.
I have some tadpoles that were given to me by my neighbour. We were told that we have 3 different species of newt. So I'm sorry, because you said you're not an amphibian expert, but I'm going to ask you anyway. That we have these 3 different species of newt.
That's really good.
Frogs in the same pond as well. There have been toads spotted in the pond as well. I'm just wondering, obviously, as Sue just said, that you can sometimes the newts can eat the tadpoles. But I'm just wondering, at what point is it best to introduce them into the pond?
I guess the bigger they are, the better they'll survive. That's really good that you've got 3 species of newt. That's really unusual. So you've got great crested, smooth, and palmate, presumably. Yeah. We'd love to know where your pond is, because that's really unusual. Yeah, I think get them as big as you can, and then they might survive better. Or even if you don't put them in the pond, and they can develop into froglets, and then just let them get on with it. But it may be that they do get predated. It's kind of one of those things. But if you can keep them separate and let them develop into frogs on their own, if they've got enough food, if you keep them in a big bucket, or something where they can develop, they might survive better as baby frogs than put them into a pond full of things that'll eat them. And then the adult frogs will then probably go into the pond themselves and breed, and they'll just carry on from there.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
I should maybe mention, actually, if you've got lots of wildlife in your garden, you can send your wildlife records into Staffordshire Ecological Record, because we're getting, hedgehogs, they're all priority species. We'd love to know where they are. So if you Google Staffordshire Ecological Record, you can send in your sightings, and little dots will appear on the map with all your species in your gardens, and we'll all be able to know where they are, which would be brilliant.
Incredibly valuable information. Yes, I was going to say that as well, Kate. Please do that, and we'll see if I can get a link into the chat before the end of the call for how you can do that.
Got one.
You got one? Drop it in. Yeah. Let's pop that in there. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much. We're going to go over to our next question, which is from well, I think it was Alan, but I think that means it's Beatrice. So I think we had a microphone problem before, but let's just see if that's resolved. If it's not, we'll just answer the question for you. No, seem to be in the same situation. So let's just ask the question. So we've got, I have a compost heap, but I'm considering getting a wormery and scared that it might attract rats. So it's Maureen on Alan, sorry, this is from Maureen, question from Maureen. I have a compost, but considering getting a wormery, but I'm scared it might attract rats. We've had a problem with them at the moment. Any advice?
I do have a wormery as well. Never had any problem with rats because it's all kind of sealed up. So make sure you get one that's well sealed, basically. I don't tend to put anything too attractive to rats in there. You can put the odd bit of dried bread and things like that in there, but it's just the vegetable peelings, really. Obviously, if you put fruit and vegetables in there, rats might be interested. I think it's just best to see what happens. I've not had them gnawing or anything at mine. I also have a food digester, which is a cone. There's a basket under the ground and the cone's on the top, and then you can put cooked food into that. It doesn't make compost, it just sort of absorbs into the ground, but not had a problem with that either. I do have mice in the garden, and they come into the conservatory and eat things, but not had any rats. But I don't feed birds, so I don't have a lot of problem with that. But I think just find one that's really well sealed and that that's nice and thick, they can't get into, and I've not had an issue with that. it's just an experiment really, but you can also bring your wormy inside, or if you have somewhere like a utility room, you can get quite small ones, and ones that you can have indoors, so that might be the answer.
That's great. Thank you very much, and worth an experiment. So we're going to go across to Liz now. I think there's a question about shrubs and bees.
Hi everyone.
Hi Liz.
Hello. Yeah, I was just wondering. I'm creating a bed for bees at the moment to try and attract, well, bumblebees, solitary bees, and I was wondering if you could advise me on the best shrubs to grow in this bed. I've got lots of herbaceous perennials, but I haven't got any shrubs in there at the moment.
Right. Trying to think now. Well, anything with flowers really, sort of hawthorn, rowan's quite nice.
Yeah.
There's not that many shrubs that flower an awful lot. Gorse is good. Might be a bit broom. That's probably a better one for a garden. If you're thinking, you know, climbers and things, you can get, if you've got something for it to grow up.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, there's a fence at the back.
I'm gonna have to think. Buddleia is a good one, but that does tend to get a bit overrun with. It's nice, but it can detract from other flowers in the garden. But it's yeah. Let me think. I'm trying to think of shrubs now. Hebees are good. They're good for bees. They love them. Bramble. I have to speak up for bramble. Things you can train on the fence as well. They're good. If I think of any more, I'll have to email.
Okay.
Have you got any more ideas, Katie?
Yeah, actually, I'm cheating and I'm just looking at one of our guides for bumblebees. I'm going to share the link in the chat.
Thank you.
And it's suggesting here, it depends on sort of what time of year. Generally, anything that attracts butterflies attracts bees. So that's a lot of flowering things: buddleia, honeysuckle, lavenders, red valerian, or Heap, H-E-B-E, seem to be the summer flowering ones. So they might be a few things to start with.
Oh, I've also got lots of raspberry plants in my garden, and the bees love them in the summer. So they're not the prettiest things in the world, but obviously you do get raspberries. But they're quite good at the back of a border.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
So we're just down to our last few questions now. We've got Rebecca. Oh no, she's just dropped off, so I think she might have left the call. So we'll go instead to Isabel. So Isabel, I'm just going to bring you in now with your question. He says, pressing buttons. There we go. It should be able to speak.
Hello everyone. I have a beautiful hawthorn tree in my front garden, which the birds love. I put Niger seeds out for the goldfinches, peanuts for the tits, pat balls for the robin. But obviously it's in leaf now, but do I still carry on feeding?
I think if they're still interested in the food, you can do, and just be aware to take out anything that isn't being eaten.
Right.
I suppose the seeds are quite important, because at this time of year there aren't any other real natural seeds around, so the seed-eating birds would like the seeds.
Right.
Yeah, things like mealworms and things like that have got a lot of protein. You can get dried ones or live ones, and they're good for birds feeding young.
Right.
Yeah, as long as they're still interested, just keep an eye on what isn't being eaten, I think.
Yeah, and what about peanuts? Are they dangerous for young birds, you know, for fledglings?
I have heard that. I think you need to put them in a feeder where they can just peck at them, not pick up a whole peanut.
Right, yeah.
So they can just, nibble at them.
Yeah, oh great, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And For our very last question, it looks like, so we've got a question from Joe, who doesn't have a microphone, so I'll be asking it for Joe. And Joe asks, I have several hedgehogs that visit or live in my garden in stone. Is it possible that we have more hedgehogs in Staffordshire than is realised?
Well, that's brilliant. That's amazing. We do have a lot of hedgehogs in Staffordshire, actually. We did a recording kind of programme a few years ago called The Great Hedgehog Hunt. We sent out postcards and people put in records. There tend to be quite a lot in urban areas, actually, and I think people just don't always see them because they're out at night. There's probably a lot more than we know about, although we do know they are declining. We get most of our records from urban areas. They're probably out in the countryside as well, but you know, people see them in their gardens. I know from my experience, I see them in the garden occasionally, and then there'll be years when I don't see them, and maybe they're getting killed on the roads, or you know, slug pellets and things can have an impact. But if you've got some, we'd love to hear from you and have your records. I think it all depends on the environment they're in. If there's lots of back gardens with access through them, not sort of solid walls, they can get in amongst the gardens a lot easier. And if they've got safe habitat, they're going to multiply. There's a really good website called Hedgehog Street, and that's all about making gardens joined up and talking to your neighbours and getting little hedgehog passageways and everybody doing something in your area. So you've obviously got a good environment there for them.
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous of that.
Yeah.
I've seen a hedgehog in my garden.
That's great. Well, that is all the questions that we've got. Oh, there's a reminder. We've got a reminder here that would really be interested in interviewing anybody that's been on this call to help us to put together an article about these wild webinars that we're going to be doing to help people during the lockdown. So if you'd be happy to tell us what you thought, then you can email us on, and it'd be Liz that wants to speak to you, l.peck@Staffordshire wildlife.org.uk. So if you'd be happy to just chat to Liz a little bit about how much you enjoyed or didn't this webinar, then that is Liz's email. And I also just want to say that if you're not, I'm sure you're all members of Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, but just in case you're not, you can always join here. It's a really great way to show your support for wildlife in the area and to learn more about marvellous events and goings on all the time. And last of all, if you wanted to donate to support Staffordshire Wildlife Trust, well, we do have an active appeal right now. So you could be supporting our Gunmore appeal, which is a really, really great reserve, and we do need people's help to allow us to buy that. So please do everything you can. I'll say a big thank you to our presenters, Katie and Kate.
We did have a couple more questions that came in on social media. We're going to do at the end, Ben.
Sorry, I'm going racing for the finish line. Why don't you answer those, Katie?
So we've got Valerie had asked about. She sent us in a picture, and she said that due to the pandemic, there's an elderly man living locally to her who has started to build a pond, but now he's unable to finish it. And she was wondering if we had any ideas on how, as this is Valerie's words, 2 oldies could improve its looks. So it's a partially finished pond. I know personally my pond that I've got in the garden, I've laid bricks around the edges and just put some plants around it to sort of make it a little bit more attractive.
Do you have can you share the picture? I did have a look at it, but yeah. I don't know if we can share it.
Is that on the presentation?
It was an email that we got sent it by email, so it wasn't on the presentation. No,
I'm afraid I don't have the picture.
No.
Okay, I do remember seeing it. There were 2 ponds, weren't there, and they had black liners weighed down with bricks.
Yeah.
My first thought, I think, was one of them. The sides are quite sort of heaped up, so they're very slopey. I don't know whether you can flatten that out a bit underneath the liner. So if it's flatter, you could get some turf. I know that when we created the wildlife garden at Wolseley, basically we took turf off an area, dug a dip, put the liner in, and just put the turf back over the top. so it was completely covered. Obviously the middle kind of dies when the water's in there, but it gives you a nice layer for things to grow into, and then you can put plug plants and things. So if there is an area you can dig some turf up out of the garden and put it over the edge, as long as there's enough soil and you keep it watered, it should be okay. But otherwise, yeah, I think Katie's got a good idea with rocks and pot plants and things like that as a temporary kind of measure. Yeah, if you can get it flattened out and get some turf so that it sort of seamlessly melds into the rest of the garden. You could also maybe have a boggy area as well, where the liner is kind of just dipped on the edge, because natural ponds, they don't tend to sort of have an edge, they're kind of sort of moved in. But if you don't have too steep an edge, it's a bit easier to get things to grow on it. So if you can kind of level it out a bit, that might help. But yeah, otherwise pots and things.
And a ramp, of course, in case any animals want to escape from the pond, fall in. So the last question was another photo we were sent in of a totally unused part of the garden. This was from Claire. She said that there's fruit trees, brambles and nettles. Any tips on how we can improve it for wildlife? I mean, for me, that sounds like it's pretty wildlife friendly anyway, but is there any extra tips for that area of garden?
It does sound like my sort of shady area in the garden. I would say that it sounds like it's got quite a lot of high nutrients there, because you've got nettles, and I saw in the photo there was some hogweed. So I would say if you want to plant some more trees and things, I mean, if it's as shady as you want it, that's great, but maybe some other trees like hazel and things like that. If you can get it shadier, you can basically, the big thugs like the nettles and the hogweed don't like kind of full shade, so they will die down a bit. But I would keep some of those, so maybe just cut back perhaps half of it, and sow some woodland or hedgerow seed mix. If it's damp, things like meadowsweet and some of the taller wetland plants, they're quite happy in shade, and they might be able to survive with all the other big plants in there. I'd get some bulbs, bluebells and things, because in the early spring there'll be less undergrowth. But you can cut it if it's getting really tall and very dense. It looks a bit like one of the glades we have in our woodland nature reserves, and obviously we do manage the rides there by cutting them sometimes. So you can cut down different bits, but have some bits taller and some bits shorter. But if you can get some shade-loving plants in there, maybe a log pile as well. I didn't video it, but I have a dead hedge in the garden as well, which is basically a big pile of sticks. So you can make them as long as you like, and that's quite a good way to use up sticks in the garden without shredding them. And obviously things will live in that. So sort of woodlandy things, I think, would be the best things to put in there.
That's great. Thanks. Great ideas. So that's definitely it for questions now, Ben. So yeah, thanks from us as well. Thanks from me for everyone taking part. And don't forget to sign up for Wild at Home on our website, which is an access to lots of different advice for families and sort of children and grown-up related stuff there, which is the link that's just come up on the video. And then we are going to be doing another live session in 2 weeks' time. The subject to be confirmed, possibly birds, if you're interested in that. So and I have been asked to issue one final thank you to all of our members and supporters who are continuing to support us at this difficult time. So it's allowing us to continue our work and to run sessions like this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so I think it's goodbye. Thank you very much. Do you want to say anything?
Quick question. If we've got questions there in the chat that we haven't answered, are we able to get back to people on those? Can we?
You'll be excited to know we've answered every single question that was dropped into the Q&A. So we've done really, really well. So everybody's questions have been answered. So I think a pat on the back for you, Kate, and to Katie.
You can always email if you've got any more.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. That was really great.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.